Everyone. We are super excited to be here. We are continuing with our amazing fall festival event here, and we've had schools from all across the state joining us today.
Everybody, are you excited?
And we're going to be going out to learn about American earliest colonies.
I'm sorry
and
for
you
being
can
late.
hear kind of in the background, we even have a class joining with us as well.
Yes,
so with that, we're going to go ahead and ask
so Clint, are you
throw
ready
it
to
over
go
to Strawberry Bank.
I'm ready to rock and roll.
All right,
Museum.
bud, let's roll.
Are you looking for trash? Yeah, there's one right over here. We're gonna be filming here in a minute.
All right, Diane,
And
can
here
you
we
go
go.
ahead and mute?
Hi, Clint.
Hey. Hi, everyone. We are out here live at
All right, friends, just give us 1 minute.
Absolutely beautiful day out here. And we're lucky
Can I give you
today
this?
we get to do a tour in this golf cart right here.
All right, I think we are good to go now. I apologize about that. Okay,
No
so
worries.
Katie, nothing like tech problems, right? And so
No,
this,
it's all
this
good.
is like a perfect segue to go back. I miss teaching American history so much. It makes me happy to think about just how far our nation has come. So here I am getting my history brain ready. I'm excited to learn about how early American colonists prepare for winter. Over to you,
Yeah.
Katie.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. My name's Katie. I work at Strawberry Bank Museum, and we are located in Portsmouth in New Hampshire. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can show you some pictures of our museum and tell you a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. Can everybody see that? Does that look good?
Yeah, it looks like a beautiful, beautiful place there.
Yeah. So this is Strawberry Bank. We are a historic house museum. We're a neighborhood. So we have quite a few houses up toward, I think, 30 on our property that most of them are on their original foundations. And this is a place where people have been living in this neighborhood for thousands of years. This here is a map of what this area in New Hampshire looked like before European colonists got here and started separating the states out as colonies. And this little yellow dot that you can see right here, this is where Strawberry Bank and where Portsmouth is. And for thousands of years before European colonists got here, the Abenaki people used this area. They lived here, came to Portsmouth seasonally, and they're still, we still have a lot of Abenaki involvement at our museum. Now, I'm sure you can probably see where Kansas is on here. New Hampshire is all the way over here, and we are right at this little spot between Maine and Massachusetts. And this part of the country is called New England, and that's because most of the settlers who came here, the Europeans, were from England. So New England in the 1700s was very rural. There were farms everywhere. It was there were vast forests with lots and lots of really big trees. And in the fall, the trees start turning these colors as yellows and oranges and reds when the weather starts getting colder. But Portsmouth itself is a town right on the water, and it was a pretty big city, so there weren't a lot of we didn't have farmers in the city. The people who lived there could get food from the farmers and also from ships that were coming in. But because in New England, it gets pretty cold, and in the winter it snows a lot, there isn't, we're not able to grow crops in the winter. So during fall, this time of year, the people living in Portsmouth would need to spend a lot of their time getting their houses and their food and everything ready, all their lives ready for winter. This here, you are going to be meeting soon one of our role players. His name is Mr. Stavers, and he is a tavern owner in 1777. This is the Pitt Tavern, one of our buildings at Strawberry Bank, and this is the tavern that Mr. Stavers owned. A tavern is it's both a hotel and a restaurant, so you can get food there, you can get a place to stay, and then at Pitt Tavern, they also had a stagecoach where you could ride to Boston. And most importantly, the tavern was a place where people could get together, spend time together, talk about things, get the news, have political debates, and that sort of thing. Mr. Stavers lived here with his family, his wife, Catherine, and he had 4 younger children who lived with him in 1777, and also an enslaved man named James who lived with them as well. So we're gonna meet Mr. Stavers in a couple of seconds, but just a few things I wanted to remind you of. Mr. Stavers lives in 1777. So we're gonna be, when you talk to him, he doesn't know anything about our time. He only knows what's going on in 1777. So we're going to be using our imagination in order to share with him what his life was like. And please ask as many questions as you like. As role players, we love questions. So now I will turn everything over to Mr. Stavers. Finish sharing my screen. Welcome, Mr. Stavers.
Well, good day. It's so nice to see you all. I hope you're all faring very well, especially during these very troubling times. Well, as you probably have heard, I do live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. This is a seaport right on the coast of the Atlantic Ocean. But I was born and raised in England, a very small village called Castle Camps. My family were farmers, and very poor farmers at that. In fact, when I was 14 years of age, the English Midlands, where Castle Camp is located, suffered a very great famine and also a typhus epidemic, which resulted in many hardships and deaths in the region. So I made up my mind then and there that as soon as I could, I would leave England and come to the Americas, where I had hoped to find a better life and perhaps new opportunities. And I did. I now own and operate the William Pitt Tavern here in Portsmouth. Of course, a tavern is a place where travelers, friends, neighbors can come together to enjoy a good meal and a drink, spend the night if they require overnight accommodations, and of course, enjoy entertainment. But of course, I think the most important function of my tavern is to enable friends and neighbors to come together to socialize, to talk over the issues of the day, perhaps read the latest newspapers, play games, but generally be together, which I think is very important. Now, being on the coast and in a seaport allows me to offer goods for my customers that come from ships that arrive from Europe and the Caribbean. For example, fine rums and wine, brown and white sugar, coffee, molasses, cocoa, salt, exotic fruits like coconut and banana, and much more. So I live in the tavern with my wife, Catherine, 4 children, and an enslaved servant whose name is James. And of course, each of us has a responsibility in operating the tavern. I, for example, oversee the business aspects of it, very boring material, believe me. My wife, Catherine, is in charge of our kitchen. She shops for food and prepares meals and bakes goods for our family and for all of our guests. My daughters, aging 16, 14, and 12, they all help Catherine in the kitchen. They also clean the guest rooms, change the linen, they sweep the tavern parlors, they wash and mend our linens and clothing, and serve guests from the bar. And even my 10-year-old, my youngest child, William, has chores to perform. For example, he brings in firewood and water needed for the day. And another of his responsibilities, one that he does not relish, is to empty the chamber pots every morning. That's a chore that falls to the youngest, and that is his job at this time. My enslaved servant, James, grooms and feeds the horses and mucks the stalls in our stable. He'll split and stack firewood, take delivery of the various provisions that I buy for the tavern. So it's now fall, and of course, we've begun preparing for the long winter ahead, as I'm sure you have as well. I've ordered large quantities of supplies for the tavern kitchen to see us through until the spring. Things like coffee, flour, salt, sugar, salt pork, bacon, cider, brandy, wine, and many, many more items. We stockpiled many cord of firewood, which we will burn in our fireplaces to cook, to bake, to keep the tavern warm for our family and guests, and of course, to make hot water for cleaning and bathing. We're readying the tavern, the stable, and the barn for the freezing weather ahead. For example, checking all the doors and windows for drafts and sealing any leaks that come through. We've already begun to bring out from storage the heavy quilts and comforters, curtains, bed warmers and foot warmers that we'll need to stay warm during those cold winter nights. And soon we'll push the children's beds together so that they can sleep next to one another in the night to stay warm. Of course, in northern areas like New Hampshire, the season for growing vegetables and fruits is very short. Also, most of the livestock, the pigs, the cattle, the sheep, are butchered in the fall when they're full grown. So some vegetables, fruits, and meats we eat when they're fresh, but much of them are preserved to assure that we have a supply of food that'll last us the entire winter. Vegetables, for example, are preserved by pickling and vinegar. They can be dried over the kitchen hearth or on racks out in the sun. Root vegetables such as potatoes, radishes, onions, turnips, beets, they can be stored in a root cellar, which we have. Now, fruits can be dried or they can be made into a jam using either sugar or honey or molasses as a sweetener. Meats can be brined. That's put in a container of salted water. They can also be smoked or pickled. Codfish, which are very plentiful here in the seacoast region, are gutted. They're split in half, covered with salt, put on racks out in the sun so that they will dry. And when they're fully dried, they're packed in big wooden barrels for consumption later during the winter.
All of this preserving, is that something that your children would have helped you or helped your wife do?
Absolutely. The children do help with that. It's a very important thing. I mean, without preserving foods, we would do without for much of the winter. Other questions?
Yeah, a question that came out was they wanted to know, did you always want to run a tavern? So you mentioned, the farming history, but there's real questions. Is that what you dreamed of doing when you were younger?
Well, to be quite honest with you, sir, the answer is no. When I left England at a very young age, I think I was 15 at the time, I joined the crew of a cargo ship called the Princess Dowager out of Liverpool. The Princess Dowager transited from England to the West Indies, to the Caribbean, and then to the Americas, eventually making its way up to Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And it was here that I met Margaret. I married, and we decided to, at that point, go into business together.
We have a question coming from Chloe. And Chloe was interested in how you said you put the children's beds closer so they stayed warm. Did adults have separate rooms? Did you share in the same spaces? And then how did babies sleep when you had to use fire to cook food. Just look a little bit more about the scenario, I guess.
Well, in the colder months, of course, we wear many layers of clothing in our beds. We have comforters that provide warmth. We have bed warmers. These are big brass pans with a long wooden handle. We put hot rocks from the fireplace in the brass pan and then rub the sheets very vigorously to warm the beds before we get in. In the guest chambers that I have for overnight guests, I do ask gentlemen to sleep in the same bed, 2, perhaps 3, especially during the winter months, so that they can stay warm. Now, the babies will sleep with us in our bed to stay warm as well. I hope that answers your question, Chloe.
Another question here that came in was, what invention, you guys said that you started your business, which sounds like it was doing great. So my question is, what invention really impacted or improved that tavern from maybe when you started the business to what it is today?
Well, I'll tell you, there's one device that we have that is just a marvelous device that helps us in the kitchen. It is called a clock jack. Now, it's hard to visualize. I do not have something to show you, but a clock jack is a device using a weight which falls very slowly, turns a few pulleys, which in turn rotates the spit. So the meat or the poultry that is on the spit can be turning and roasting all on its own accord. That perhaps is one of the most significant inventions that I use in my tavern. It certainly saves quite a bit of time. While the meat is roasting on its own accord, my wife and daughters can be doing other things rather than sitting there turning the spit by hand.
So another question that's come in is, folks do marry at this time, yes? And would you might have had pets?
Well, I do have a string of horses. I would not call them pets. Use them for business purposes. But if you're referring to smaller animals, I do not maintain pets. The horses, of course, are used for our stagecoach service, which goes to Boston once every week. In fact, it leaves our tavern on a Tuesday morning and arrives in Boston on Wednesday afternoon. It's a 2-day trip. It's almost 60 miles to Boston. Of course, halfway there, the stagecoach will stop at a very fine tavern like my own, where the passengers can have a supper, spend a good night, and have a fine breakfast in the morning before they continue their trip to Boston. And of course, it reverses course later in the week. It leaves Boston on a Friday and arrives in Portsmouth that Saturday afternoon. Now, when the stagecoach arrives, I have an office on the second floor of my tavern. I open the window and I blow my bugle. Now, I'm not a musician, but I blow the bugle to alert people in the neighborhood that the stagecoach has arrived. And if they were expecting passengers, they should come and greet them. But I'm also commissioned to carry the mail and parcels from Boston. So people are interested to see if they have any of those as well.
All right, another question that's coming in here is, these sound like amazing services that you offer. How much would staying in your tavern cost, or even the coach that you just described? How much would that cost someone?
Well, the coach costs 1 English pound. That is inclusive of the overnight stay in Newburyport at a fine tavern and all the meals associated with it. A meal at our tavern, well, it varies. We serve breakfast, dinner, and supper. Breakfast, we will ask typically 8 shillings. Dinner is 12 shillings, and a light supper is, I believe we're charging 6 shillings for that now. Very fair prices, by the way. My wife is a wonderful cook, and I know that our guests enjoy her cooking and pay a very fair price.
Cameron asks, if the youngest has to clean the chamber pot, what was that process?
Well, for one thing, he holds his nose, but he'll take the chamber pots out to the privy or outhouse and empty the contents into the privy, and then take the chamber pots back to the house or the tavern where he will wash them out with water and then replace them in the chambers, the guest chambers or our own living chambers.
Chloe asked another question. She wants to know, in your community, do you, you obviously have your stagecoach service available, but do folks travel by boat and walk as well?
Yes, there are various ways to travel, of course, by boat. If you're going any distance up the coast or down into Boston, that's the most expedient way to travel. By horseback, of course, by horse-drawn carriage, and one can walk. So those are the various ways that we go from one place to another.
All right, another question here. You've been talking, it was really fascinating to hear about just the sleeping quarters and how you keep those warm. What other ways did the weather affect your tavern there? Was there a busy season, a slow season, or was it steady all year round?
Well, thinking back, I think it's steady most of the year. Of course, in the wintertime, there is a great deal of snow in our region, but the community uses rollers, horse-drawn rollers to tamp down the snow on the streets so that the sleighs can glide most easily over the streets. In fact, much wood is harvested from the forests during the winter because it's much easier to drag the large logs on sleighs out of the forest on snow. So I think the answer is that our business is about the same year round.
Okay, so the kitchen area, obviously it's a little difficult to keep food cold unless it's the winter time. So how do we preserve food over the winter months? And was hunting a big part of how you gather food?
Well, I think I described not too many minutes ago some of the ways that we do preserve food. And of course, it is critical that we do that so that we have something to sustain ourselves for the winter months. And yes, there is hunting here. Trapping is often conducted. I myself have very little time for that and will more than likely buy those game items from hunters in the area. But here in the wintertime, there are items that are available year-round. For example, poultry. We live on the coast, so fish or shellfish like oysters and lobster are available all year round. And as you mentioned, game. It could be deer, beaver, bear, raccoon, turkey, pheasant, pigeons, quail, wild hare. One of my favorites is squirrel. But so.
Can you remind me how like fruit and vegetables would be preserved for the winter?
Well, vegetables can be preserved by pickling. In other words, putting them into vinegar. And here in New England, we use apple cider vinegar because apples are abundant in our region. Vegetables can also be dried. For example, we can string using a needle and thread string beans or little cubes of squash and hang them in front of the fireplace to dry. Corn can be put on racks out in the sun and dried in that manner. By the way, corn is very useful. I'm sure you probably know this from where you are. the dried kernels of corn can be milled into cornmeal, which we use to make corn mush for breakfast. The corn husks can be used to stuff mattresses. The corn silk can be used as tinder to help start the fire. And the corn cob, well, that can be used in the outhouse. I'll let you use your imaginations on that is used.
Indeed. With children, you said you have your own children that help in the kitchen and they also help with the cleaning. Is school something that's possible for all of them?
School is a possibility. In fact, my wife, Catherine, started our children learning to read and write very, very early in their lives. For example, paper is very expensive, as you may know. So my wife, Catherine, would take the children into the kitchen where there is ash, a light coating of ash on the hearth, and trace the letters in the ash and ask the children to pronounce the letters. And then she would trace words and ask them to recite the words. So they would hear and see what the letters and the words look like. She would also read to them from the Bible. There are many passages from the Bible that the children are familiar with from church services every week. And that's one of the ways that they would learn to read.
Chloe's curious is, how does one get pigeon for dinner? How would you hunt pigeon?
Well, you can, I guess a skilled hunter can shoot them, can capture them with nets. The pigeon is prepared much as you would prepare a chicken or a turkey, gutted and roasted.
Josh, what questions do you have on your end?
Yeah, so another question that came in, you talked about coming over such at an early age. I would love to know, just have you ever been back to England, and is there someone that maybe you've befriended over the years during your time as with the tavern there?
I have not been back to England. If I had any desire to go back, that is now been put aside now that we're at war with Great Britain. My brother Bartholomew, who lived here in Portsmouth with me for many years, and in fact was my partner in the stagecoach that we ran, his loyalties to King George were so strong that he went back to England. I have made many friends here in Portsmouth over the years. Of course, being in business, I'm very familiar with many of the merchants here in the community and many of the town leaders. I'm not sure if that answers your question fully, but
You're a Mason too, aren't you, Mr. Stavers?
I am a Mason. In fact, in my tavern on the 3rd level, I have a very large open space. We built it specifically for the Masons to hold their monthly meetings. But to be quite honest with you, I derive much more benefit from that room than the Masons, because I have all types of entertainment that I can provide there. Music, dancing, like we've had plays, we've presented an opera. I can rent the space for auctions and sales, for public meetings, private meetings. There are many, many uses that I derive from that large open room on the 3rd level.
Speaking of the winter time, what were some of the recreational activities that families could do for fun?
Well, my goodness. Well, there is snowshoeing, ice skating. Of course, in my advanced years, that's not something that I will endeavor to do, but many of the children do enjoy that. Of course, hunting and trapping, recreational in a sense, those are conducted year round as well. Of course, there are the usual snowball fights. I'm sure you children have been involved in those. And those kinds of things. I'm not a recreationist myself, so I know just a few of those things that my children do enjoy.
Josh, any questions on your end?
So you've talked a lot about different foods. I'm just curious, what is a family favorite there?
Well, I have to admit, I am partial to two things for dinner. One is the pigeon pie. I love pigeon pie. And I also love beaver tail that is sauteed with sherry and butter. One of my favorites. For breakfast, I'm very partial to the blood pudding. Do you know blood pudding? It's a pudding made from pork blood, pork meat, and various grains. So it's a sausage. Those are the things that I enjoy the most. For vegetables, I enjoy thoroughly onions and cream, one of my favorites. And one thing that we'll be offering at the Thanksgiving celebration that I'm planning for our tavern in just a few months.
Okay, Josh, we have time for one last question. If you have one.
I'm not seeing anything else here on my end, but we'll give it just a moment here.
Mr. Stavers, what do
Yes.
you love most about living where you live?
I relish that we live on a seacoast. As I mentioned earlier, there are many ships that come from all over the Atlantic nations that bring us goods that, 100 miles inland, people would not enjoy. Spices, exotic fruits, and those kinds of things. I enjoy that quite a bit. And I enjoy the winter holidays that we have here. We're so much looking forward to Thanksgiving this year. And our governor this year has proclaimed that the day of Thanksgiving in New Hampshire will be December 18th this year. So we're excited, and we'll begin to prepare for the holidays. So.
And is it true that you and your family celebrate Christmas because you're Anglican? You're from the Church of England, but some of the other people in town might not.
Well, Christmas is certainly celebrated. There are church services, but it's in my mind, it's a more minor holiday. Thanksgiving, of course, is the most significant holiday of the season for my family and for many here in Portsmouth. And of course, we look forward to the new year with the cycle of life starting again every year. We'll celebrate New Year's Day with festivities, with dancing and music, and looking forward together to the new year.
All right, last question here. Then we'll have to unfortunately say goodbye. You mentioned the war. How has that affected you?
Well, here in New Hampshire, we've been spared any direct military confrontation with the British since the war began. However, there has been an economic impact. We are no longer trading partners with Great Britain. So many of the goods that we've relied upon coming from Great Britain for many, many years are no longer available. And we have to look for new trading partners around the globe to begin to bring those items in again. And also the British Navy will place occasional blockades at the head of the river. The river flows into the Atlantic Ocean. So when there's a blockade there, it prevents ships from coming to port. Those ships carrying cargo, goods that myself and other merchants in the Portsmouth area need to conduct our business. And it seems to me that people are spending less money, perhaps holding in reserve funds in case perhaps the British in the end win this war. It may be that people will decide to leave, to perhaps go west or north to escape British rule. So there's been an economic impact, I guess the short answer.
Wow, thank you so much for your time, sir, and giving us an insight to how your tavern runs.
Well, it's my pleasure. And if you are in New Hampshire and Portsmouth in particular, I invite you and your families to come to the William Pitt Tavern. And just remind me that we've met once before, and I assure you we'll treat you very, very well. It's been my pleasure. Good day to all of you.
Good day, Mr. Stavers. Thank you.
Thank you.